So, are we ready?
We
Ready.
are. Let's go.
Hi, everyone. This is Sima Lieberman, and I want to welcome you today to Culture Connects Us. This is another episode of the series Culture Connects Us, brought to you by Village Connect. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to host. I'm very excited to host this episode. And joining me today are Kwame Asajifu, who's one of the co-authors of the book Leading with Self-Awareness, which is the title of this episode. He's the founder and CEO of Village Connect. With over 30 years of experience, he's a thought leader, consultant, workshop facilitator, master CBTC coach, author, and motivational speaker focusing on fatherhood, youth, and family success. And my other conversationalist today is Scott Shute, who's co-founder of Changing Work. Scott has journeyed from America's heartland to the hiking trails of Nepal to the boardrooms of major tech companies across the world. He also led a global team of 1,000 customer service employees supporting 700 million network members around the world at LinkedIn. So, how are you both doing today?
Fantastic. Glad to
Great.
be here. Hi, everybody.
Great. How did you two meet? I mean, we're going to be talking about leading with self-awareness, but I want to become aware of how did the two of you meet?
Kwame?
Well, I was invited to speak at LinkedIn. There was a conference going on, Mending the Mind, and it was a conference on digital health. And it was a great conference. I really enjoyed myself. There was a lot of great people there, a lot of great information. And it just so happens that Scott and I shared the stage. And I think we both sort of realized that we were sort of speaking the same language, and so a conversation ensued from there. And there you have it. I don't know, Scott, if you have a different story.
That's the story. We were at a good place at the right time and the right place at LinkedIn. And it's been, I don't know, a couple of years, but I'm glad to have had the opportunity to meet Kwame.
Now, you are the co-authors of Leading with Self-Awareness. What is leading with self-awareness? What is even self-awareness?
There it is.
For me, I think self-awareness, I don't know if there's one perfect definition, but I think it's our ability to really have a deeper understanding about ourselves, how we tick, the things that we like, the things that we don't like. And we wrote this in the context of being a better leader, because oftentimes leaders are mentors or coaches, or just generally leading a set of people. And to be a great leader, I think it starts with being aware of yourself, because if you're not aware of yourself and what you're doing, it's really hard to then be aware of others and to be able to be a great leader for them.
That's just what Kwame and I were talking about. So, and what does that mean to you, Kwame?
Well, I mean, I had to ditto that, and I also agree that there's no one answer to that question. I put a lot of emphasis on the fact that when we tap into our humanity, our consciousness expands tremendously, and we have a lot more access to things that under other circumstances we would not, and that's why I feel like it's a travesty when we are not conditioned to honor and be able to nurture our humanity and understand what that is, because I wasn't taught what being a human being was in school. It just wasn't a part of the curriculum.
I hear people talk about self-awareness, and a lot of self-awareness that I hear people talk about is very selfish. And when I think about culture, I think about Culture Connects Us is the theme of your podcast. And then I think about leading with self-awareness and how they're related, because it seems to me that that if you become self-aware, that you have to be fully self-aware, you have to be aware of other people, and you have to be aware of other people who are not just like you. So one question I have is, you're both from very different backgrounds. How did you make that cultural connection? Because oftentimes I know in a lot of movements like self-awareness, like wellness, they didn't originate with white people, but in the United States, it seems that the people, a lot of the louder voices, especially in corporate America, tend to be white. So how did the two of you actually make that connection, being from the different cultures that you're from?
Well, again, my response is that I don't believe that it had anything to do with Scott and I. I believe that there are things going on behind the scenes, and I think that once you begin to move on your path, I think that there's things that begin to show up, and that includes people. So I definitely believe that it had nothing to do with Scott and I. I think we connected because it was meant for us to connect, and it was a part of our personal journeys.
Yeah. I second that. I also think that we find a common ground. You know, when we very first met, Kwame and I were both giving a talk. And of course, the context of our talk, the context of our lives has been very different, but we are essentially saying the same thing, right? And it's at that point that we connected. You know, another way of talking about self-awareness, to even expand, you know, to maybe even be a little bit more direct, I would talk about our own divinity, right? So I believe that each of us are essence, whatever you want to call it. Some people call it soul, whatever, a divine spark. And then on top of that divine spark, we're wrapped by the personality of this Scott is body, mind, emotion. And my body looks different than Kwame's body. You know, the context of my life has been different than the context of Kwame's life. But at the root of it, our essence is of the same stuff. And so when we become more aware of our true nature, of essence, then we can start to realize there's no separation. There's no separation between a Scott and a Kwame and a Sima and everybody else. So I think it's at that root where we make the connection.
You know, my background, actually, I have a master's degree in holistic health education, like from over 30 years ago. So things have changed. And I'm a diversity and inclusion strategist and facilitator. And I realized that when I first started learning holistic health education, I was only aware of, and when I started learning about self-awareness and meditation, I thought it was all kind of like nuts, because I only believed in myself. And I think that we all go through a journey. I mean, unless your parents teach you from the minute that you're born who you are in relationship to other people, I think that we go through a journey to be able to reach a level of self-awareness. So I'd love to know from both of you, what has your journey actually been? Scott, I mean, and you guys could, this is a conversation, so sure, you could come in anytime. But I think I would, and other people would like to know, where did it come from? Because a lot of times people say, "Oh yeah, I'm really self-aware. I meditate every day." Blah 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 blah. But they're still the same selfish, self-seeking, self-absorbed person that they always were. And what I get from this book, from both of you, and also from the other people who wrote in the book, that they really are talking about their relationship, not only to themselves, but also to the rest of the world. Sure. And so I would love to, and I'm sure people listening want to know, okay, what's been your personal journey? What can they take from you? Not take from you,
Sure. I would say my life journey has been about the movement from me to we. right? So when I was a teenager, and look, still today, right? I'm a work in progress. But especially as a teenager, my focus was on survival, was on achieving, was on doing well in life. And it was all about me. How could I get a good grade? How could I be good at sports? How could I then get a good job and just be an achiever? And over time, life, part of it we mature spiritually, but also life happens to us. So, I got married. So now I'm in a relationship and it's more than just me. And then I have kids and it's really more than me. And then I became a leader at work. It's really more about me. And you realize that, oh, for us to be successful, for me to be successful, the big we has to be successful, literally in my life as it changed. And as that was happening naturally in life, I hope that I was evolving spiritually as well. I do have a daily practice. I hope that it's helping. And over time, I, I think that me and other people go through this movement of from me to we. They go through this movement of kind of three phases, and not everybody gets to the third phase. But the first phase is life is happening to me, and we're kind of like a victim, right? Stuff is happening to me, I can't control it. And then if we're more in tune with the universe, I believe it's more like, okay, life is happening for me. Yeah, it's not always what I want. Often it's not what I want. But if I'm able to look back over time, a lot of those hard experiences were good for my learning. And then when we're really, really, really in tune with the divine, with our true selves, our essence, and we're coming from that place as essence, then life happens through us. We become a co-worker with the divine. So I'm on that journey. I'm totally a work in progress, but I'm hoping to, continue to move down the line.
How about you, Kwame?
Yeah, there's 5 words that I often share with folks that I engage. 5 powerful words that basically set a tone once you grow comfortable, or once I've grown comfortable with those words. Let your will be done. I'm not a very religious person. However, I've gone through iterations of um, experiences on my journey, and just to speak to the book, and I want to give a big ups to Scott for this project, because I think anytime you can begin to blend voices, you can blend experiences, then that's where we get an opportunity to feel the full scope and benefit that life and the world has to offer us. But I experienced a lot of trauma as a kid. I didn't know it was trauma, but and so one thing that's brilliant about children is how resilient they are. And as a child, you find ways to cope and to survive. And so I look at trauma now as sort of rocket fuel. When we experience those kind of experiences that test us and try us, it's like rocket fuel. It can either burn you up or it'll catapult you into the heavens, and be a thrust that other folks won't have access to because they didn't get that rocket fuel. So self-awareness is a huge part of that. But going back to my original comment, let your will be done. Turning it over, it's like getting to a place where it's like, hey, I don't have enough to get through this. I need something else. And when you ask, in a lot of cases, it shows up. But just learning how to trust that, and I think it's difficult to trust that
Yeah.
when you're so used to external supports and getting all of your cues from an external source.
Yeah. Uh, I think that's right. And I think there's a balance of let thy will be done, turning it over, and also self-responsibility, right? There's a certain level of, okay, we have a certain skill set. Each one of us have built a set of skills through our survival mechanism, right? And so we have some to give back. We have some to apply to every challenge that comes our way. And so there's this striving element. There's this element of, okay, we're trying to create something. We're trying to make things happen in our life. But then once I've done everything that I can do, I got to turn it over. I let thy will be done. It's not my will. I'm trying to be in tune with the thing, whatever it is, and I'm trying to work as hard as I can towards whatever goal I think that I'm in tune with. But at the end of the day, it's not my plan. Let go.
I forgot to mention in the beginning, we have a chat box. And if you would like to make a comment, please put it in the chat. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. We have somebody who is monitoring the chat, and at the last 5 or 6 minutes of the show, we're going to open it up. We're going to start answering some of those questions. So you can either put it in now or wait. I want to go a little bit deeper too, and I want to get a little bit more specific about, in practice, what does that mean? Because there are a lot of people, again, who say that they are very self-aware, but they're really not self-aware. They just take, they're just selfish. So what's the difference between that? Between being selfish and being self-aware? And what is self-awareness to each of you in practice? How do you practice self-awareness? And how do you practice self-awareness as leaders?
Kwame, go for
it. Selfish. I've had to redefine that word over the years because in many cases, it could be viewed that you're being selfish when you take care of yourself. You're being selfish when you choose to embark on a journey of finding yourself and growing into who you believe you are. And, and sometimes that rubs people the wrong way when people have a vision or a view of you and they've grown comfortable with you being the way you are, you showing up the way you show up, you speaking the way you speak. And so quite often what you'll hear is you're being selfish. You're not thinking about me, when in actuality, taking into account that we all are evolving into who we're supposed to become. And so what that looks like is change. That looks like, I may not look the same way tomorrow that I look today. And that sort of speaks to the circle that you have around you, people that are willing to allow you to become. So just in terms of practice, I just believe it's, introspection is really, really key. And I just believe that in this society, in westernized society, I think in some ways it's frowned upon to spend time looking at yourself because you get called all those names. You're being selfish, you're being self-centered, when in actuality, that's how you learn. That's how we actually connect. And I think Scott alluded to something earlier. The more self-aware I become, the more I can see you. To me, it's just that simple.
What do you got to say, Scott?
I was thinking about, well, so I agree with all that. And this whole idea that some people can say they're self-aware and by external observation, they appear selfish. And that may be true. So if some people they can do a lot of work on themselves and they can know themselves, take all the personality tests, from Myers-Briggs to Enneagram to going to therapy to, there's lots of ways to learn more about yourself. And there's then the step of to what end, right? So you could have a psychopath or a sociopath or a dictator learn all those things about themselves and use it for ill, right? Use it for negativity. And I think that what we're aiming for when we say self-awareness is more than just that kind of mental understanding of who we are. It comes with an intended meaning that we're using it in the context of conscious business, which is, which is what changing work is all about. So we're talking about it, self-awareness in the context of conscious business, so that we can do good in the world, so that we can be a force for good. And so I think intention has a big part in what the outcome of self-awareness is, right? If self-awareness is to really discover my true self so I can be of better service in the world, that's really powerful. Or if it's just, I just want to build a better bomb, then that's a problem. So I think the intentionality we come to things, the energy we bring to things is perhaps even more important than the learning we get.
So we're talking about going inside
Can I just
ourselves.
add
Oh,
a
go
piece
ahead.
Selma, I just wanted
Go
to
ahead.
piggyback on that just from the standpoint of intention. And in the work that I've done over the years with men and boys, what's significant is just the permissions that in many cases we're not allowed. And one of them is being gentle with ourselves. One of them it's just like the phenomenon of crying, right? Shedding tears. And I can't tell you how many men that have told me that what comes up for them is shame. That it's shameful to cry, like, I did something wrong. When, again, that self-awareness, it really is about what I do unto myself is what I do unto others. So I would not have any intention whatsoever on creating a bomb if I'm truly loving and honoring myself to the best of my ability.
So we're talking about going inside ourselves to find out who we are, right? And who we are in relationship to the world around us. But before we could really contribute to the organization and to the world around us, I think I hear you saying that we have to be aware of not only who we are, but also how we treat other people and how we are perceived. Because I think that when we're self-aware, we become aware of our interactions with everybody else. And your book is leading with self-awareness. So I think that I'd love to hear what both of you mean by leading with self-awareness in concrete ways, because you could have, I've seen people who are like, I've been working in corporate America for a long time. And I have seen people who are CEOs who have a meditation practice. And and they could talk a lot of spirituality, but when it comes time to them, how they treat their employees and the people who work with them, not even, they're still dictators, they're still racist, they're still sexist, but they got their own meditation thing going on. And they got a meditation room in their house or in their business. So I think I hear you two talking about something that's much more advanced than that. So I would love for the two of you to continue the conversation and talk about it in terms of how does it play out?
I'll take a shot at that. I think in business, in life generally, it's this, again, the movement from me to we. So when I think about a conscious business, it's not one that's just making money, just existing to make money, or for the individual to say, I'm just in it to get ahead myself. It's one for both the leader and the business itself to say, I'm creating value for all of our stakeholders. So in a business, that's, yes, the shareholders, because they invested their money with you. So you need to have a good business model to give them a good return. But yes, your customers, to provide real value for customers so that they stay with you over the long term and add value. And yes, your employees, to provide an amazing place to work, a safe, healthy place to work where they can be their best, right? Where they can grow as a person. And so this is a concrete way of thinking about that balance. And it's a balance, right? So when the company does well financially, I believe that should be shared with the employees. If the company's not doing well financially, okay, then everybody shares in it so that the company can stay alive. And this goes for leaders as well. So it's not just me being successful, but how do I make everybody else around me successful? I think it starts with that simple mindset, and then it permeates into everything that we do, right? So as an example, in my world, I led customer service at LinkedIn, and I was having a conversation with one of my service reps, and was walking the halls, and I stopped to talk to her by her desk, and she had this little sticky note on her monitor that said "Grandma," and I was like, "What?" And just tell me what does that mean? And she didn't want to first, but first she started talking about it. She says, "You know what? This job is challenging sometimes, right? Every day I'm handling 30 or 40 or 60 cases, customer service tickets, whatever you want to call them. And these customers are not calling or texting or emailing because they love me, because they're happy to talk to me. They're upset, they're angry. And sometimes that's really frustrating. And I'm dealing with the same thing over and over and over. And sometimes I'm not the person I want to be, like everybody else." But she said, "So what I do is I think about my grandma, and I think, what if it was my grandma on the other end of this call or chat or email? Because for my grandma, I would do anything. I would be a better person. I would be so patient with her. I would do all the things. I would be great." And so before every chat, before every phone call, I look at this note, I think about my grandma on the other end. How would I act right now? So to me, that's an example of self-awareness in a lot of different ways. The things that were good or bad for her, the things that motivated her or didn't motivate her. And she used those for positive gain, for positive good, not only for her, but for everybody involved, for her, for the customer, which makes it good for the company she's working for.
How about you, Kwame?
Yeah, it can be tough when there's a narrative that we learn, and that narrative is that we must do something in order to have something, and then we can be somebody. And what I strive to do in many cases with folks that I work with is just to have a conversation with them about that. Just like, what does that really look like when the first thing that we do is that I have to do something. Um, and what that does is it starts us out in opposite of our humanity, because that's where our humanity lives, in our beingness. That's why they call us human beings, not human doings. And so I think just in practice is just like really helping folks to grow their consciousness and their awareness, just to look at which one do they choose first, which one do they think is the most important. Because in most cases, when we think about going to school as a small child, at least from the community I grew up in, the narrative was always, you need to go to school and get good grades so you can go to college, and then you can get you a good job, and then you can be somebody, as opposed to you're somebody when you leave this house.
Mm.
And that just really requires a lot of self-awareness from the standpoint of parents. And that's why I think parents play a very pivotal role in what our world looks like, and what it's becoming. It's just shifting that narrative. Because if I walk out in the world and I already know I'm somebody, I'm going to move different.
So,
That's
what were
right.
your lives like? For both, I'm interested. I'm interested too because we know that the two of you are from very different backgrounds, and that you made a connection around self awareness, leading with self awareness. I'm interested. I know other people are always interested. Every time I do any kind of show, people say, "Oh, I loved hearing the personal stories." What were you like as an unself aware leader? What happened? And give me some concrete examples, because somebody might say, listen, hey, I want to be a leader with self-awareness. Give me some examples. What does it look like? So let's hear you two tackle that one, because I think you have so much to share and people need to know, okay, what is it?
Hmm.
Well, I can make it quick. I got a quick one to that one. What is it like to be a leader that's not self-aware? And I
From
just
your
put
own experience,
from all,
if you, unless you've always been self-aware.
no,
Okay.
no. I you know, I always let people know I've always been an activist. It's just that I was acting out, acting out for a part of my life. I was into crime. I was, you know, and I did some things that I'm not proud of today. But I was acting out of this sense of not being aware of who I am and, you know, why am I here? And those were some very dark days. It was very confusing. I was very angry. And all I remember is I just needed somebody to tell me, what am I supposed to be doing? Who who am I and where am I supposed to be going? And you know, and I love my parents. I think they did the best they could, but there was just an element that was really, really missing from my life, and it wasn't until I began to grow into this level. And you know, I spent most of my teenage years incarcerated. I was in juvenile hall in the California Youth Authority, and I remember my mom started bringing me books, and that was extremely pivotal for me. I remember one book in particular, Man Child in the Promised Land, by Claude Brown. And I could see myself in this book. I could see this gentleman telling his story in Harlem. And I could see his confusion, and it gave me something to attach to say, hey, I'm not the only one, and that this is a story that's been told before, and other people are experiencing this. And I would have to say that my readings really took me to another level of getting to understand who I am.
Man-Child was one of my favorite books. That had a big influence on me too. Hey, go ahead, Scott.
Sure. As I mentioned, I'm still feel like very much a work in progress in this whole body of work, right? There are days, I think for me, for everybody, where I have capacity. And when I have capacity, I remember the good things. I remember to say, hey, how you doing before we get down to business? I remember your birthday. I remember to ask about your dog or what's important to you. Um, when things are hard, I don't get frustrated. We attack the problem, not the person. And then there's days when I'm mad. There's days when the world is overwhelming. There's days when I didn't get enough sleep. There's days when I fight with my partner. There's days when the bills are due or something breaks. And or there's days when three things happen in a row and I'm frustrated. And then we have the same call and I don't extend that same level of kindness or curiosity or other awareness because I'm caught up in my own mess. So for me, I think it's a constant work to build capacity. It's a constant work to build a level of capability and clarity that allows me to operate then as a conscious leader. And it's not something where you cross some finish line and you throw up your hands in the air and go, oh, I did it. Now I'm a conscious leader. It doesn't work that way. It has to be earned every single day. And I'm still trying to earn it every single day. There's days where I get it right. There's days where I blow it.
And so what I'm hearing both of you say is that leading with self-awareness, it is a process. And part of this self-awareness is being in that process of, if you do something like not being friendly, not saying hello, whatever it is, the self-awareness piece is that you then are aware of it and you could do something about it. You could fix it. But when you're not self-aware, you don't even know that you're doing anything. You think, yeah, I'm a great leader, but nobody else thinks that you're great. I understand the thing about going from unconscious to conscious. And I also have a history of drug addiction. And I just remember that I thought I was really a nice person, But if you disagreed with me, I wasn't going to be nice to you. And it wasn't until later on that I became aware of the way I act towards other people sometimes is reflected on the way that I feel about myself. So when you talk about self-awareness, what do you practice in order to keep growing, in order to maintain that self-awareness?
So for me, like, I think there's a lot of ways in, but I think a big chunk of it starts with some sort of self-reflection, whether it's journaling or praying or meditating or whatever it is. Well, there's different levels of self-reflection. One is to understand. It could be those personality tests like Enneagram or Myers-Briggs. But then there's the constant practice of going back and checking within and kind of getting quiet, because the world is a very noisy place, very distracting place. And it requires us, I believe, to spend some time and be quiet and get away from the noise, to check in, to say, how am I? Who am I? What do I want to be? How do I want to be? And then there's also that alignment to something bigger, right? If you're religious or spiritual or whatever it is, something bigger. It could just be nature. Like when we're out in nature, it makes us feel like we're part of something bigger, versus if we're just staring at our phone all day or staring in the mirror, yeah, we just think about ourselves. So my practice personally is, it doesn't happen every day, but I try every day to spend 20, 30 minutes before I start the rest of my day going inward and having that practice. That's the core. And then I try to do a lot of other things too, but that's the core of my practice.
I'd have to agree with everything Scott just said. I'll just add, what also helps me is writing, journaling. In many cases, I feel things and I don't really know how I'm feeling, and then when I start writing, it just starts coming out, and it gives me room for clarity. Another thing for me is being able to get feedback from people. And so I find it's extremely critical for me to have, a group of individuals that, I can go talk to, and I could just, say, hey, look, I just want to talk. I just want to say what I need to say. I don't, I need you to just be quiet. And sometimes that's necessary. It's just, I just need to say it to another human being, what's happening inside of me, without, because, generally people are nice. People love you. They're going to tell you, well, it's going to be okay. And that's not what I need right now. I just need a sounding board. Quite often I love analogies, of course, but, the whole aspect of the mirror. What's the utility of a mirror? And a mirror gives you the opportunity to see yourself, and then if you want to make corrections. I don't like the way my hair looks. I can do something about that, and that mirror assists me in doing that. And so I think people serve that role as well, to give me that feedback that I need. I don't always agree with it all, but I just, at least I seek it, and I have it, and I'm blessed for that.
This is great, because so often people want to be self-aware. They want to have some kind of practice, but they don't know what to do. And what the two of you have just done is given people some concrete things that they can actually do to be able to go within themselves and to take time for themselves to be quiet and look at how actually they want to be. So so we're talking about self-awareness, we're talking about authenticity, and also empathy. When Scott, I'm pointing at you, but nobody can see that I'm pointing at you. So when you were talking about being nice to people or treating people a certain way, So being self-aware really helps us create empathy. And there's a lot, people are talking about empathy all over the place these days. But now, oftentimes, like, science has said, neuroscientists have talked about the fact that there's a tendency for people to be empathetic, more empathetic towards people who are like them, and not as empathetic to people who are not like them, or to be kinder, or to help people who are like them, or like Kendrick Lamar says, they're not like us. They're not like us. I don't see them. So how do you see, how do we go beyond that? If we're really self-aware, and then we talk about, to be self-aware also means that we talk about our relationship to other people. I'm going to ask you this, Scott. How do we go beyond that? How do we go beyond that identity empathy?
Yeah, I'll talk about compassion, and I'll draw a distinction between empathy and compassion. And we're splitting hairs a little bit here, but because sometimes people say, well, compassion is empathy plus action. And that's a simple way of thinking about it. The research shows that empathy comes from a place in our brain that is the fear center of our brain. So in other words, like I could be watching the news and seeing something bad happen in another part of the world, and I could think, oh, I can put myself in their shoes, but the truth is I don't want to be them, right? That's empathy. It's a part of empathy. It comes from fear. I know what that must feel like. I don't want that, right? Compassion comes from the love part of our brain. Compassion says, I can understand how that must feel. Of course, it's not me, but I can try to understand how that must feel. And that feeling creates a feeling of warmth inside of me that wants to help. It wants to do something, right? It wants to take action. There may or may not be anything for me to do. But the interesting part about these two things is empathy. There's a real thing called empathy fatigue. Some people call it compassion fatigue. I don't think that's possible. Empathy fatigue is a real thing, because if you get overwhelmed with this sense of wanting to help, but you can't. Compassion comes from the place in our brain which is about love, and that is unending. There's no such thing as compassion fatigue if it's coming from that place. Okay, so back to your question, right? So this idea that we only see people, we only have empathy or compassion for people who are like us. That's
or
true.
More, not only, but more empathy for people.
More,
yeah.
And it's not genetically, it's evolutionarily true, right? Because we evolved in a resource scarce environment. So if we were in a tribe with 100 people, in the old days, 100,000 years ago, if somebody walked across the hill into our territory, we don't ask questions, we just kill them. That was literally how we evolved over time. It's how primates evolved, it's how we evolved. And so now we live in a world where we're all mushed up together, right? Our people are mixed up with the other people. So how do we move beyond that? Well, moving beyond that requires us to first be aware that this is happening, right? I see somebody who's not like me. Maybe I feel neutral to them, like I just don't care about them. Maybe I feel negative towards them. It's like, oh, that kind of person annoys me or bothers me for some reason. It's being aware of that first. And then it's like checking in. It's like, do I really have reason to not treat this person as I would my own kin, my own type, my own kind? And it goes back to intention. Who do I see as my tribe? If I see it as the 8 billion-ish people who are on the planet, then I can get beyond it. If I'm only interested in people who look and act like me or from my own neighborhood, then it's hard to get behind.
Kwame, what were you going to say?
First I just want to say that was brilliant, Scott. That comparison, I never heard that said. The comparison of empathy and compassion. I'm going to use that if that's okay.
Absolutely, please do.
I not to oversimplify the question or my response to the question. when we look at a map and we see the distinctions and the lines that separate states and cities and counties, I personally believe that that's a result of us not being connected to our humanity. And I believe the further we move into our humanity, those lines start disappearing, where we can then see that we're all one.
But we have to, it seems to me too, that we have to be that part of that self-awareness is to be able to see that, am I mainly being compassionate to people who are like me? Or am I taking my level of self-awareness and being aware of other people to take that empathy, take that compassion, and see other people? Because oftentimes people who are, when they say they're not like us, are invisible.
Yeah, for sure. It's being aware that that's happening inside of us. And I think at a larger level, it's aided by our worldview, right? So depending on what is your worldview, and this is where governments and religions have been playing a role for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years in kind of training us on how to think about the world. And it's for, I don't know if there's any right or wrong in any of those belief systems, but each one of them is useful in its own way. So as an example, if you believe, so my personal belief is like, okay, I'm Scott, the personality of mind, body, emotion. But beyond that, I'm essence, I'm soul. And if I believe that, then that means that every other person here is also soul. And if I believe that, then, the outer bodies, the outer personalities that we're wearing, that we're expressing, are just how we get around this time. I believe in karma and reincarnation. So I may have looked like Kwame last time. He may have looked like me, or we may have both looked like somebody else. This is just my worldview. So, but that worldview allows me to see past the facade of culture, past the facade of race or income or society, and try to see people as soul. So at a super high level, I think worldview has a big part to play in how we can do that.
So let's look at it in a concrete example. We have two people from two different backgrounds co-authoring a book and agreeing on the importance of leading with self-awareness. What benefits have each of you derived from being in relationship with each other, with those coming from those two different backgrounds? Well, you're smiling, Scott, so you got to go first.
Well, for me, it's all about learning, right? It's all about expanding my awareness of the world and how the world works. And what I'm very aware of is that my experience is very different than lots of people's experience, even people who look like me. And for sure, my experience is very different than Kwame's experience of growing up, right? So I told Kwame, I grew up on a farm in Kansas, right? Super rural, an hour from the nearest fast food, probably 2 or 3 hours away from the nearest person of color, right? So my experience growing up was very different. And so I appreciate Kwame because what I see in him is someone who is saying the same things as me, but has come from a completely different context. And I think that's really beautiful because it's, for the most important things that we're saying, we're highly aligned. The context, the stories we have to tell are radically different. But the beautiful part about that is that we're able to serve different communities, right? Kwame can speak to his community and other communities in ways that I cannot and have credibility, and vice versa. So it takes all of us to make a positive change. It takes all of us to really understand ourselves. So I appreciate you, Kwame, and I appreciate you being my teacher and mentor and friend.
So Kwame.
Thank you. Ditto. Other than for me, other than the exposure other than the access. Um, I would say that meeting Scott and getting to know Scott, um, it adds to my connection to my own humanity. And I know that's difficult for some people would say, well, what do you mean? And that's kind of out there and woo-woo. But for me, I take my journey serious and I don't take anything for granted, even the stuff that I may deem negative. It's all a part of my journey. And that's the message that I like to give to people is, revisit that term bad or good. Is it really bad? Is it really good? I don't know. Maybe it's just there to teach you something.
Yeah.
And so, that's been my experience, and that's been the value of reaching across and connecting because, I know people like Scott and I have friends like Scott, but we're still different and it's still a different, experience. And, and just in terms of a shout out to CCU, Culture Connects Us, the documentary. Um, we have as a part of the campaign a humanitarian award to a gentleman named Peter Rubin, who was a significant friend of mine. But he was much more when it comes to his contributions to humanity and to the world. And some people may never know, and that's why we're really shouting out his name in that process.
We're going to take questions in a minute, but I just want to say what I've gotten to from the conversation with the two of you. Culture connects us, and that happens when we're self-aware. We get over our fear of people who are different and enables us to really get to know people. And when we get to know people, that's where we find incredible connections that we didn't even know that we had before. And that's how we become one with people. And the two of you, and in your book, you've really embarked on a journey to have deep conversations. And it's those deep conversations that make people feel they become aware of who they are, and then they're able to become one with people who are different. So I'm opening it up now to questions. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat.
Wanda asks, how do you trust turning it over to the divine? Kwame, how do you trust?
Very carefully. I think, one of the big things that I encounter for myself in my own journey is coming to terms with my stories and how, especially going through trauma. Trauma has a way of creating a sense of reality. And it kind of like freezes you in that moment, kind of like when I was 6 years old, I experienced some stuff and then I made it mean something. And in that moment, that's what it meant. And then I carry that into adulthood. And that's kind of like a story that I'll keep with me. And so, it's kind of like just really coming to terms with the stories that I tell myself and separating that from, my essence, as Scott alluded to earlier. My essence is not my story, and the story is not my essence. And the more and more I began to sort of move towards the essence and feed the essence, those stories have less significance.
Neil Logan asks, can having loose morals make or break you becoming self-aware with yourself and a great leader? Not everyone grows up with examples of what each family role is supposed to look like. For example, the family unit can be broken and sometimes non-existent with those in the foster care system. Who would like to answer that question?
I'd like to hear Scott's answer to that previous question as well.
All right. Well, okay. Well, let's talk about turning it over to the divine. I agree with everything you said, Kwame. And I think for me, I would add practice. And then, so as an example, I come up to a decision point and I don't know the answer. And at some point, what's useful is to have humility to say, I don't know the answer and I'm open to something bigger. And oftentimes what happens is I'll get more information when I do that. So it's just the act of saying, I don't know, but I could use some help. It's like, oh yeah, the help was all around. We were just waiting for you to ask. And then I take action on that guidance, and then I watch what happens. And then it's just rinse and repeat and just see, like, over time, because sometimes what will happen is the story, as Kwame says, is so strong that it won't go away. And I'm still making a decision based on the story versus based on the guidance from Essence. So then this other question from Nia about loose morals and role models, I would say, I think role models are really important because it shapes our worldview. If we have I was going to say right or wrong. I don't know if that's even true. But if we have a worldview that is pro-social, meaning, hey, if you do good things for society, good things will happen to you, then probably we have a better chance of building self-awareness than if we had the worldview of, hey, it's just Darwinism, it's survival of the fittest. Do whatever you need to do to survive. You know, the good things go to those who take them. Then probably that will lead to less self-awareness. So the examples we have in our lives that are helping to shape our worldview, whether that's just whatever our parents told us or religion or spirituality or what government's telling us, those are really powerful, really powerful.
Thank you. I'm looking at the time, and I know we got to end unless you want to stay on for a few minutes because we have a couple of extra questions. But I was just going to say, the two of you work so well together. You should write a book. So,
hey, we did.
Hold up. Could you hold up that for people who actually are viewing this and say the titles, because most people will be listening to this afterwards.
The book is called Leading with Self-Awareness, Starting from the Inside Out. You can find it especially online on places like Amazon and Barnes and Noble, but it's in a few bookstores as well. But you can find it there.
And how do people get in touch with each of you?
Kwame?
Village Connect. Our website is village-connect.
Don't forget the dash. Don't forget the dash.
Forget the dash. And our main office line is 510-564-4240. And we've got 24-hour answering. So you can leave a message and we'll respond.
So village-connect.org.
That's correct.
Cool.
Okay.
And for me, you can find what we're doing, including if you want to be part of the next book, where the plan is to write 2 or 3 books a year. We're taking applications for our 3rd book that's coming out in summer of 2025. So please join us. You can find us at changingwork.org. Changingwork.org. You can reach out to me directly, scott@changingwork.org.
Thank you, Bo. I've really enjoyed talking to the two of you. Thank you so much for inviting me to moderate the discussion. And Wanda has put the information about Village Connect and Changing Work in the chat. So do you have time for one more question, or?
I want to give a quick shout out to the CCU production team, Wanda Whitaker, Jalila Bell, and Kayla Marin. We are now registered in 7 film festivals throughout the country. And so we're rolling that out. And we're also, we're open to hosting private viewings, both virtual and in person, if folks are interested in having a viewing of the film. And what comes along with that is a coordinated discussion. And we have what we call an action pack with tangible and practical suggestions on how you can shift culture in your own world with individuals, families, and with your community. And so please reach out to us at Village Connect and we can get you signed up. It's 8 film festivals, excuse me, Jalila has corrected me.
Hey, Scott, any last words?
Just thank you. Thank you for everyone who's watching and listening. And please go out there and be ambassadors for compassion and ambassadors that show your own self-awareness. So thank you.
Thank you. And
Thanks.
again, this has been another episode of Culture Connects Us, brought to you by Village Connect. And don't forget, get that book, Leading with Self-Awareness. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. If you want to stay on a couple of minutes afterwards to talk to people, you can.